In retrospect, I do not believe that Silent Hill 3 was as bad as what people say it is. I believe that its release built upon certain narratives left in stasis from the first game, and that the atmosphere in Silent Hill 3 is some of the best you'll see in the horror genre. The music as well as the characters all build this game up as a worthy successor to some of the best in the horror scene, and build upon Silent Hill 2's gameplay, adding some quality of life differences and smoothing out combat. Silent Hill 3, although being less successful, garnered a reputation of utmost importance for new Silent Hill fans to try, and its music remains a hallmark for the series. There is still a charm to Silent Hill 3 that I believe has not been lost and still upholds Silent Hill 2's standard, but perhaps to a lesser extent. I still subscribe to the idea that this game is an underrated masterpiece, and it deserves more recognition for what it has done for the horror scene over the past 2 decades. Here I'd like to welcome you to the world of madness, obscurity, and absolute horror brilliance that is Silent Hill 3.
Inside.
For clothes that Tristan lost. At Bold 3 detergent plus fabrics.
Hello and welcome, new
Spray relief.
You two take care of labor. Only intended for a plane capsule.
You don't want to die of call toll free.
Silent Hill 3 is the story of a girl named Heather Mason, a normal 17-year-old girl who leads a regular life, but for some reason her past comes knocking and she's thrown into the hell of Silent Hill without any escape. The gameplay is incredibly simplistic. To reiterate what I was saying before, the game of Silent Hill 3 features similar combat to Silent Hill 2, but smooths it out by a lot, to make it a much more enjoyable experience that doesn't end up button mashing or raging at the camera when it focuses on something that you don't want it to. The story follows Heather, who casually wakes up from a nightmare about her death at the Lakeside Amusement Park. She later meets characters like Douglas Cartlin, a rather abrupt personality who is trying to find Heather for his client, the Order, a cult first talked about in Silent Hill 1. Heather later meets Claudia Wolf, who is the priestess of the cult, and later says that she requires Heather's talent as she is soon to find out to be the reborn version of Alessa, who was sacrificed at the end of Silent Hill 1. This talent is said to lead those into the paradise with bloodstained hands. The story from then on moves in your normal Silent Hill fashion. Heather finds an elevator and is transported to the other world in probably the coolest yet terrifying transition in the game.
Is this a dream? It's gotta be. Not even a kid could believe in this. But when am I going to let go?
That transition kind of sets up the standard of Silent Hill 3, as it is probably the scariest game in the Silent Hill series. Previous entries like Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 1 have had their share of scary moments, but they did it in a much more psychological factor, as explained by my SH2 analysis. Silent Hill 3 is way more in your face about it, and some moments are just flat out disturbing. The otherworld's aesthetic that is known to be quite horrifying and visceral, which is turned up to another level in this entry. You can kind of apply that to the entire goal Team Silent set out to accomplish. They want to set the standard and reputation Japanese horrors are known for, which are disturbing spiritual horrors with little to no regard of holding back. You can see this this in the first sections of the game with Heather's first experience with an enemy such as the Closer, which itself has a very disturbing appearance with a humanoid figure but disfigured face. It has large bags on the end of its arms and a twitching head, similar to the bobblehead nurses in SH2. Its overall intrusive stature really makes the player feel uncomfortable because it's such an unconventional design that has a familiar figure but operates in a completely different way. The more Heather descends into this nightmare, the worse the creatures and setting become. You can kind of see this with the juxtaposition of these inviting and clean areas you enter, such as the mall and the hilltop center, but then they change into the other world and become these hellish landscapes with no recollection of its previous self. There are a lot of deeper meanings and symbolism in Silent Hill 3, and a lot of it takes a much darker turn from Silent Hill 2 and makes it more relevant to current norms. The game's messages are mostly delivered in a mean-spirited way, but that is kind of the point, as Heather is dragged through a past which leads to deep spiritual connections to Silent Hill, all the way from her birth. That's kind of what this game revolves around. Birth. You can see a lot of this in the settings that Heather visits in the other world, such as the bloodied corridor which you walk down, and even the bathtub scene where it becomes bloodied with veins as you transport to the other world, being very symbolic of flesh. Considering that the alternate reality in which Heather is trapped in seems to adapt itself like an intelligence, or it's like a living being, such as with locked doors and respective keys which are placed in a puzzle-like way, especially in the alternate form, as accesses are blocked strategically, suggesting it chooses a path for Heather to walk. And that kind of references that the whole other world is someone's mind's creation. You can say that the blood, veins, and organic stuff on the walls induces a sense of being inside a living or aware reality. All of this kind of ties into the quote, "Fear of blood tends to create fear of the flesh," which is kind of a direct representation of what Heather feels during the game. She's trying to escape her past, which revolves around birth in Silent Hill 1.
What makes Silent Hill 3 such a heavy and psychological game are its characters and their inner struggles. It talks a lot about these character issues and how in the end they deal with them. A similar theme to Silent Hill 2 but on a much broader scale. The central theme of Silent Hill 3 is a girl in her transition to adulthood. We are given some very well-known elements of horror right from the opening nightmare sequence. Blood red colors, an obsession with blades, and a charming mascot in lifeless positions, all amid an abandoned amusement park, setting up a Silent Hill environment, matching the inner struggles of the characters that we later see. Her prior personas are these real, different slices of existence, and her survival depends on comparing infancy and adulthood. By the time the story is over, Heather is no longer Alessa or Cheryl, but it is through their memories that she finally learns to be her own person and take charge of her own destiny. The game's antagonist, Claudia Wolf, represents the opposite side of the coin. She is a lifeless impersonation of a sensible young adult who values blind faith above being an individual. The character themes of men in the game serve as a metaphor for adulthood, or at least for what we discover of it in Silent Hill 3. These characters vary in how they deal with their issues. Vincent, for example, who takes a strange joy in making fun of a few uneducated people in the game like Claudia. Douglas Cartlin, on the other hand, tries to overcome his loyalty to the Order and wants to become his own person. While the other engages in exploitation, the second wants salvation. Although there aren't a lot of actors in the game, they all help solidifying the internal issues of their characters and how they can overcome them. Important lessons are learnt about how people can deal with their inner struggles. Douglas, who had felt he had lost a parental direction a long time ago, later finds it again in the end when helping Heather. A lot of this comes back to my main argument. Silent Hill is such a clever idea for a franchise, as it focuses on the inner struggles of people and personifies them in a lot of ways, to the point that allows them to help themselves and overcome their challenges of what brought them to Silent Hill in the first place. Silent Hill 3, I believe, takes that idea to a whole new level.
I will say that Silent Hill 3 is quite an in-your-face game. Its settings, action, and music all tie into that idea. Some are shocked in this game's different approach to the music style, as they juxtapose it with Silent Hill 2. But I believe that the music has had many moments that truly immersed me in the setting and created so many moments of genuine horror, but also eeriness, which is one of my favorite parts of this game. Its homage to liminality. I can say for me, and many alone, that the style of Silent Hill 3 has a very metallic and inward focus, as opposed to the style of Silent Hill 2, which is more dreamy and melancholic. Silent Hill 3's soundtrack just throws it out the window to let audiences know that this is hell and it's real. It evokes this nightmarish factor in a lot of songs, with Mary McGlynn's amazing vocal performance providing a much more relatable sense to some of the songs as they have lyrics this time, instead of instrumentals. As you know, Silent Hill 2 features a much more melancholic feeling and softer music, almost leaning towards a sadder theme than anything else. Silent Hill 3's soundtrack is much more of a nightmare. I mean, that's kind of the best way to really describe it. The soundtrack is louder. If anything, the main theme gives off a more 2000s vibe with anything else.
Green grass blows in the wind, dancing. It would be a much better.
Rock being extremely popular during this era, with big artists like Avril Lavigne and bands like Blink-182. It's almost like something Heather herself would listen to. I would mostly say that piano was the main focus for the second game, but the most memorable instrument in this soundtrack would have to be the guitar. What's interesting about this soundtrack, as I previously mentioned, that the second game had much more of a softer tone / dreamlike feel, but this soundtrack doesn't abandon that vibe completely. Float Up From a Dream brings back that organ-like piano, reminiscing back to Silent Hill 2. For many, this style was way too different from SH2, but I feel like there were plenty of homages to SH2's soundtrack, with songs like Never Forgive Me, Never Forget Me, which has an extremely eerie and ambiguous feel to it. Or Dance with the Night Wind, which returns to that classic SH2 piano, but in a much more melancholic and mysterious tone. Or even Breeze in the Monochrome Night, which evokes that ambient and dreamy feel SH is known for. They really immersed me as a whole, and my first playthrough I'll never forget. Alone in a dark room with nothing but a CRT, playing this game the way the developers intended it to be played. It's such a nostalgic piece for me, and I feel like Silent Hill 3's soundtrack has made me appreciate Akira Yamaoka even more, and really miss him. I'd have to say that Silent Hill 3 has immersed more in this world of dread and ambiguity, employing a much more industrial aesthetic, which I applaud to the fullest extent. The gritty and unapologetic atmosphere helps set up Silent Hill as the closest thing to a person's inner fears and demons. Some might say that the graphics of Silent Hill 3 have not aged well, but I believe the opposite. I believe that there is charm in the jarring graphics, and it creates depth in the game, to the point that it reflects the narrative of Silent Hill as this town which is a direct representation of people's inner fears. As I said in my Silent Hill analysis, I don't think a single horror game has really left me with such an experience and feeling that Silent Hill has. It has taught me new meanings for the words of isolation, ambiguity, and fear, and its visual storytelling has left me in awe. The deeper themes of this franchise really challenge the psyche of many who play, contemplating how so many deal with their deepest anxieties and depressions. Playing the game now just makes me relive those feelings of nostalgia and melancholy that I've come to expect from games like Silent Hill. I still lay awake some nights listening to some playlists of the music from Silent Hill 3, just as a way to immerse myself in the atmosphere of pure ambiguity, but also peace that Silent Hill as a series is known for. I've always loved how Silent Hill ties into the personal experiences of humans and how they deal with their traumas, or own little versions of Silent Hill in their minds. It's a very personal thing for me, and I believe for many others as well, as this game personifies and relates to the guilt many broken people feel. There have been hundreds of comments I've seen from people explaining that they find their peace in Silent Hill, as it's such a humanistic entity. Silent Hill 3 is by far not perfect, and it took me a couple playthroughs to fully enjoy the world Team Silent created. It has pacing issues, and in some sections it does feel rushed, with some textures being reused from previous games. I would say for me personally that Silent Hill 2 has been and shall continue to be my favorite Silent Hill game, but that doesn't mean that Silent Hill 3 isn't a close second. Silent Hill 3 in many respects took the franchise to a whole new level graphically as well as stylistically, playing to the key strengths of the Japanese style of horror, being very symbolic and having many hidden meanings. I also believe that it made the Silent Hill franchise a lot more scary and flat out disturbing in the genuine horror fashion, which was my only gripe with its predecessor, as I found Silent Hill 2 to be more cerebral and psychological, not disturbing in some regard. Silent Hill 3 kind of takes that horror factor to another level. Silent Hill 3 is a very personal game for me. It represents so many modern ideas and embodies the struggles of the postmodern world. In my opinion, it holds a much more grounded to reality feel with its themes and a lot of Heather's struggles representing the majority. Perhaps it could be with the start of the game, as Heather keeps a pocket knife on her to symbolize the struggles of a lot of young girls in unfamiliar environments, especially with Douglas's actions being very abrupt, with little to no regard of Heather's actual well-being. Another symbolic part could be the scene with Heather in her room, as she keeps a taser there at all times, perhaps also suggesting that struggle previously mentioned. Heather being such a down-to-earth character makes it easy to relate to. She's a normal teen who, as of this point, led a normal life. Obviously her outfit is dated by today's standards, but she represents the common teenager of the 2000s. Along with that idea, as well as the deeper meanings of the game with its relation to birth and a coming-of-age story for a majority of the characters, it definitely sets itself as the perfect ending to the original Silent Hill. The music as well as the aesthetic of the game really pushes this idea of a nightmare that is explored further than Silent Hill 2. I believe that this game built upon Silent Hill 2's narrative as well as the first game, as it answered so many questions and ended many holes in the story. I think in terms of art style, Silent Hill 3 really employs its own style perfectly and is distinct from the other two games. It applies what Silent Hill did, but adds to it on a much greater scale in terms of style and art direction. Graphics in my opinion still look really good today, and would have even looked better running on an emulator. That being said, I kind of feel like this game has been forgotten to time, and was the team's last good entry into the franchise before things became more corporate. I feel like this game signaled the end of originality and the end of pure authentic style that Silent Hill has been known for, to be replaced with something that's much more mass produced like Homecoming and Downpour. For me, Silent Hill 3 will always hold a special place in my heart for its bold statement to the horror genre, but also iconic one. I feel like it built upon Silent Hill 2's gameplay and storytelling to evoke a much more personal and deeper meaning for many who play video games. It not only represents that with its deeper psychological traits, but also stylistically, with its aesthetic that personifies the characters' inner feelings. All in all, Silent Hill 3 has been and shall continue to have a lasting effect on the many who play through the games, living on as homages found in other games like Lost in Vivo and Iron Lung. Along with its flaws, it revolutionized horror and made a lasting impression on a whole generation of developers. Silent Hill 3 signaled the dying days of Team Silent, but its style and impact on horror as a whole with its psychological traits still hasn't been explored or replicated since, and probably never will. It is such a profound series that we may never see one like it ever have such an impact ever again. I love Silent Hill, and I really hope it's never forgotten. This has been Nathan Hines. Thanks for watching.